Welcome to AP Biology Week 10 Office Hour, recapping the cellular respiration and energy harvesting chemical reactions, chain of chemical reactions that harvest ATP from the macromolecules that they store energy. You studied the glycolysis that starts in the cytoplasm, and this is an important energy harvesting catabolic reaction, but produces very limited amount of ATP. Evolutionary-wise, it's really interesting and important to acknowledge glycolysis because every single organism can do and does glycolysis. They have the enzymes, and it's really provides a proof of evolution that supports the evolution because this is a common energy harvesting series of reactions. You learned about the oxidation of the pyruvate entering the Krebs cycle, and the oxidative phosphorylation that has two parts, the electron transport chain and the chemiosmosis. And we will pick up a couple of the important threads from those. But first, I want to just ask you, why do we need ATP? You might just say, oh, because we are talking, we are moving, we need the energy for that. And that's true. But in a molecular way, on a cellular level, why do we need that? Why do my cells need that totally? We learned in unit 1 or 2, the active transport, that it is important to maintain the homeostasis inside of a cell. Homeostasis is way different than equilibrium. And homeostasis, the internal milieu in the cell, can be and is different, contains a different milieu inside than the outside. Also, not only for the transport, but reproducing more cells. We will check that in the next unit when we have cells and we want to just divide the cells. But before that, its DNA got to be reproduced. It's an anabolic reaction, and it requires ATP also. Think about that the chromosomes, they are not living stuff. I mean, they cannot move on their own. So we have to pull those sister chromatids or the chromosomes apart from each other to have the same DNA content in the cells if we are talking about mitosis. Anabolic reactions, building up big molecules like in the what we covered in photosynthesis, requires ATP too. And maintaining membrane potential, for example, the nerve cells, or inside of our ears with the hair cells, all of them, it requires ATP, as well as starting a catabolic reaction. We learned that in the enzyme section. In order to start a chemical reaction, it requires some energy input. So based on that, we discussed the redox reactions. And redox reactions, that means reduction and oxidation takes place at the same time based on which way the electrons are moving. In AP biology, it's easier because we can say the hydrogens are following the electrons. So wherever we see hydrogen moving from one place to another, well, if it leaves a molecule, that molecule gets oxidized. If that molecule picks up the hydrogen as well as the electrons, it's going to get reduced. But truly, the high energy electrons or the electrons are the ones that they are playing the game. So talk about cellular respiration first. Cellular respiration can be aerobic and anaerobic. Aerobic, that means the final electron acceptor in the cellular respiration is going to be the oxygen. Cellular respiration, I want to point out that it contains electron-transport chain, either aerobic or anaerobic. The anaerobic is not equal to fermentation. Fermentation is a different story, happens in the cytoplasm. It supplies the NAD plus for glycolysis in order for the cell to produce small amount of ATP molecules. But anaerobic cellular respiration contains electrotransport chain. It happens without oxygens. Now, what would be the final electron acceptor? It could be the sulfate. It can be the nitrate. It can be sulfur. And the sulfur, for example, will turn into hydrogen sulfide. It's going to get reduced. Hydrogen sulfide. So they are going to get reduced to, like oxygen is going to get reduced to water. Okay, so this is, where can we see anaerobic cellular respiration? Deep sea vent organisms when they don't have oxygen present in that area. So this is good. The other topic, what I want to just talk before we go through the important steps in cellular respiration in the aerobic way, is the phosphorylation. We distinguish again two types of phosphorylation: the substrate level and the oxidative phosphorylation. Phosphorylation means that adding a phosphate group, inorganic phosphate group, to an ADP. At a substrate level, we have a substrate that contains an inorganic phosphate attached to it. And it's going to, and we add an ADP, and the end result will be a substrate without the phosphate group and an ATP molecule, because that phosphate group is going to get transferred to the ADP to form the ATP molecule. This is a substrate level and does not going to produce tons of ATP. This is a direct transfer of the phosphate molecule, phosphate group to the ADP. The oxidative phosphorylation requires an electrotransport chain where the high energy electron carriers, such as NADH or FADH2, is going to get oxidized, NAD plus and FAD, going to get oxidized, building up proton gradient with the help of the high energy electrons. Proton gradient, the hydrogens go in one side or another, as well as they have an ATP synthase attached to the electrotransport chain, where at one end, we have the ADP and the inorganic phosphate to turn into ATP, while the hydrogen ion is moving from a high concentration, okay, we see the high concentration to a low concentration. This is the phosphorylation that happens with oxidation of the NADH and FADH2 molecules. Well, we know that the electron transport chain is going to get reduced at the same time, but this is what we call oxidative phosphorylation. Tons of ATPs are produced by that process. Okay, so let's dive into the nuts and bolts of the cellular respiration. That I will not go through the individual steps, but I would like to explain the point of the parts of cellular respiration. So let's draw a big mitochondrion. This is the mitochondrion, the outer membrane, and now the inner membrane with tons of folds. The folds structure function. The fold has high surface area for the electron transport chain to be placed in. This is the electron transport chain, And also we have an ATP synthase. I just put the A's in here. And I will add one more thing in here. This is to see the bigger picture. This is in part of a cell, the cell that has also a nucleus, for example. So this is not to scale, guys. So this is the inside, the matrix, and we have the glucose in here that it's going to get oxidized all the way down. So let's write it down before the anaerobic cellular respiration. We have the glucose, and we have the oxygen, and it's going to turn carbon dioxide and water. Balance the equation, and here is the, oops, you do not see it, the equation, and the glucose is going to get oxidized, losing its electrons, high energy electrons, as well as hydrogen, so it's going to be oxidized. And the other one is the oxygen is gaining electrons and hydrogen, so it's going to be reduced. So there's no oxidation without reduction, as well as no reduction without oxidation. So let's go back to the glucose. The glucose gets oxidized in the cytoplasm, and it's going to turn into pyruvate. During that, couple of electrons are going to be stripped off from the glucose, and it's going to have NAD plus will turn into NADH, as well as we have very few amount of ATP2 in that process. This is the glycolysis in the cytoplasm, very similar for every organisms. This is not one step, several steps of chemical reactions supported by enzymes. The pyruvate is going to get into the mitochondrion through active transport. And in the mitochondrion, matrix, it's going to turn into acetyl molecule. The glucose has 6 carbon. The pyruvate has 3 carbon molecule. The acetyl molecule has 2 carbon molecules. So 1 carbon will leave in the form of carbon dioxide. The acetyl molecule is going to get into the Krebs cycle. This is the citric acid cycle that to get into the cycle, the coenzyme A will help to get into. And in this cycle, the high energy electrons are going to be stripped off from the acetyl molecule. So high energy electrons are going to be picked up by NAD plus to turn into NADH, as well as the high energy electrons are going to get added to the FAD, and it's going to turn into FADH. The carbon dioxide, 2 of them will leave. And here, so the acetyl molecule totally got disassembled. And there's some ATP production, small amount of ATP production happens in here, or in a GTP. So energy production will happen, small amount in here. I say GTP, depending on what we call. It's a minor detail at this point. The whole idea is that the NADH and the FADH are going to take their high energy electrons to the electrotransport chain, and the electrotransport chain uses the electrons, high energy electrons. It will be down, okay, in here, okay, to build up a proton gradient. So pushing out the hydrogens when they have the high energy electrons. They pass it down along the chain, and every time they push hydrogen ions into the intermembrane space. So what can we say about the intermembrane space? Its pH is pretty low, acidic. Please pay attention to the pH scale, because it's also kind of a mistake from students in the AP FRQ responses. So very acidic. And now this so the electrotransport chain made up the proton gradient. Inside, I put a small H in here, but more on the outside. The hydrogen ion wanna just go back through chemiosmosis, and it will go back here. As it goes back, it fuses. I use the word fuses, but just makes the ADP and the inorganic phosphate join together to form ATP. And a ton of ATP is going to be produced as hydrogen ion flows inside into the matrix. Now, here comes one more thing. Ooh, that's just kind of a messy in here. Here comes the oxygen, and it has a high electronegativity. It means it doesn't matter what kind of electron it is, it wanna just pick it up. It accepts no matter what electron. High energy, low energy, does not care, because it has a high electronegativity. That is really the reason why it's going to pick up this exhausted electron at the end of the electrotransport chain. So it's going to be picked up by the oxygen, as well as the hydrogen ion that came into the matrix via the ATP synthase, and they all together going to form water. So the oxygen gets reduced by hydrogen ion. Oops. Okay, got reduced by picking up hydrogen ions and the electrons. This water is going to leave the cell as an end product. And now the ATP is produced. That was really the whole idea, the ATP, that again, as the ATP turns into ADP and inorganic phosphate, it can fuel, and it will fuel chemical reactions, either catabolic, starting the catabolic reaction, or anabolic reactions, or transport, or movement of the chromosomes to the two ends of a cell. That's it for the cellular respiration, the anaerobic one. The aerobic one. Sorry about that. Have a good one, guys.